excited for our conversation today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it and looking forward to rocking and rolling, man.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Rico, I think you have a pretty interesting background, right? Why don't you talk me through or walk me through how your journey started? Did you start in IT? Did you,
No, no.
do some other sort of work, right? Like, what does that beginning phase look like for you?
Yeah, there's a lot to go over. A very long time ago, I was an operator in the military and also paramilitary. I was an infantryman, combat arms, did 9 rotations overseas. I was actually pretty much grunt, like just going out there
Hmm.
doing what the ward needs to be done, right? Doing the good Lord's work, doing door to door lead cells. That's what I called it. And just being the knuckle dragger, right? And then I went to that to being a special operator, tier 1 operator, and whatnot. And it got to a point to where I was like, hey, I think I see something. I need to do something different. Like your body, your mind can only do
Hmm.
so much, right? And I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to law school. So I went to law school, started doing that. And then after I finished law school, I did one more pump in Afghanistan. And then I was like, hey, I was getting paid really good money. I was making like 6 figures. And I was like, hey, I need to get into IT. And I took an engineering job making $35,000 a year, and it was rough, man. But I knew I needed to get the hands-on experience and whatnot because I knew the end goal was digital forensics, and started doing that, busting my chops and whatnot, getting skin in my teeth, and then started getting into incident response and forensics itself, and just started making headway. And I knew the stuff I learned from the military, from counterinsurgency operations. I just knew how critical digital information was, and then law school on top of that. So kind of accelerated my career to just being an incident responder and forensicator.
Hmm.
And then I was like, hey, I'm gonna go now try my hand at being a CISO because I already had the leadership experience, and it was cool, man. It was real cool, really interesting, real fun.
Huh. Okay, so you covered a lot of ground there. Let's go back to maybe your days in the military, right? What made you want to start going down the special forces route?
Yeah, so some of the stuff what we've seen is, you go to traditional units, right? Field artillery, infantry units. You do some high speed stuff. Like nobody really says, "Hey, you're doing some cool stuff," but you do some really cool things like TCPs, LPs, recon, and then in the special operations community, it's like you get it broken down even furthermore. It's like, hey, you get lesser equipment, lesser guys, and you become a very honed precision skill set. And at that point, you're like, hey, let's just go through the train up, go through the workup, go through all the cues, get your training docket and certification, whatnot, and then get on to a team. And then when you get to a team, it's when you learn everybody else's job. Like
Hmm.
there are certain brigade level teams, and there are certain like tri level teams, and also some other type of teams. And you get even smaller, and you say, okay, I have to know commo, I have to know intelligence, I have to know, whoever's doing the door kicking, stuff like that. So you have to know these things. And once you become even a smaller team, let's say 8 to 12 man team, you're very much of an integrated part of each other. So where this person left off, you will pick up, and vice versa. There was a nutrition company, I think it was called Soft Nutrition. They went out of business, or they closed a business, and it was a bunch of I think it was guys from third or fifth group, and they were like, hey, here's a book. They gave it to the next partner, but like, go fill the orders this way, this is how we do it, blah blah blah. And they were rocking really good business for a very long time. And the reason they close up is, one, they lost interest, and number two, they wanted to hand it off to another special operator who was from that team. And same premise applies in forensics, same premise applies in cyber. You want to birds of a feather flock together, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, because I asked that because I feel like almost a lot of those similar, mentality qualities that you have to build to be successful in that area translate actually over into cybersecurity, right? So I always think about it as like, when you're starting out, you're like going into the suck, right? I don't know how else to explain it other than that, right? Like I wrestled a bit, done some jujitsu and whatnot,
Yeah.
and that's like the closest comparison that I could have, right? That I could ever have, which is not even a comparison.
It
Um,
is a comparison, though. It is. right?
it has a similar mentality. You know,
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to say, right? Because when you're in practice, when you're going through your training and whatnot, from what I've heard from a lot of other special forces operators, you know, they literally just say make a deal with yourself that you're going to make it to the next meal, right? You're going
Yeah,
to wake up, you're going to go to breakfast, right?
yeah,
And then when you're going to get done with breakfast, let's just make it to lunch and see what happens.
yeah,
You know, like okay, let's make it to dinner now, right?
mm,
And I think those same principles or that same principle is really related in business and IT and security overall, right? Especially when you're making potentially a career change, you know. And sometimes even for myself, when I was starting out in IT, I had to literally have those small little tiny goals, right?
yeah.
Of like, hey, let's just, you know, let's make it through the month. You know, like it's really hard right now financially. Like, you know, you said, right? You started out at 35,000. I started out right around there as well. I mean, that's not a lot
It's
of money.
rough. It's rough.
That's tough. You know, for years I had to actually like decide which bills I was going to pay that month and which bills I could lapse. You know, I mean, like that's a real struggle right there, and it's really tempting, you know, to give up, right? And potentially even like make a pivot, maybe go back into what you were doing before. How did you stay strong to the path that you decided to go down once you went down it?
It was very, I call it the accordion effect, right? I knew that I wanted to be an incident responder, own my own firm, be a CISO, right? I knew that was the end goal. And I had to go backwards a lot. Like you brought up a very good point. Like you had to choose which bills you were going to pay, right? My number one bill was always child support. Like it was $1,700 a month. And I was like, okay, that is a no brainer. I will fight, kick, and scream for my rent. That's the next one. Everything else in between, because I had no car payment, couldn't afford one,
Mm,
and I was living off my retirement at that time. I was like, everything else in between is upon me. So I would go be a bouncer. I would go, do security operations. There are these really quick pumps that you go over to like Sudan, Angola, Libya, or like Sierra Leone and Congo for like 3 or 4 months at a time. I would go do those and make some money and come back. So as I was progressing forward, but when I made the demark, right, the decision was like, I know for a fact that I have to make this decision and it's going to hurt. So instead of going overseas, I would just do little odd jobs here and there. And dude, I've never met a lot of IT guys who know how to operate a backhoe, right? And so like, and also other IT, some IT guys, not a lot, but some, they don't know how to use a drill. So I'm just like, hey, I'll start building stuff. So I started building things and little by little, but now it's 100% cyber.
yeah, yeah, that's a mentality that I think a lot of people, you know, are lacking and potentially even like looking for in some way, right? Like I remember, you know, again, right, when I was making that little amount of money, I was doing everything I possibly could on the side,
Mhm.
you know, not just to make ends meet, but I was trying to make that time be as valuable as I possibly could towards reaching my goals of getting into cybersecurity.
Mhm.
And it took me, you know, 2.5 years, right, before between realizing that I wanted to go into cybersecurity to actually achieving it, right? It took me 2.5 years, and I was
Yeah.
being told no every single day,
Yep.
literally every single day, because I would be applying nonstop. So every single day I'd have a phone interview, phone screen, maybe a video interview, in-person interview. I mean, I was told no literally every single day, and after 2.5 years, I was like, man, either it's going to happen today or it's not going to happen at all, because I had two final round interviews, one in the suburbs of Chicago and one in downtown Chicago, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And I said, if I don't walk away with an offer today, like cybersecurity probably isn't for me. I'm going to go join, you know, the military or something, right? Like I was that desperate. And sure enough, like it came through, right? I got two offers at the end of that day, blew me away. It
Yep.
was like, okay, I finally reached my goal. I finally got my foot in the door. Someone believed in me enough to just say yes, you know, to you know, give me an opportunity, right? That's all you really need. And
You
now,
bring up an
oh
interesting point. Um, my experience was not fun because like I was a lot bigger than I was 250 pounds, like just raw muscle, an operator guy, fresh
yeah,
out of law school. And when I was getting IT, dude, I've heard like you're stupid, you're just a good looking dude. nobody really cares about you. I'm like, dude, like this. I
Yeah.
thought we're trying to solve problems, and people are so mean.
Yeah.
Like in the
Oh yeah.
teams, right? Like you can just punch somebody. You're just like, I'm just gonna punch you in the face, and this will be done real quick. Like it's real simple. But like a little IT guy, and I hate saying this, scrawny little IT guy who drives a Corvette, and he's like, "You're stupid," and you're like, "Dude, uh, this is not gonna go well. Like, just
Right.
stop."
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would go on some of these interviews and, I would be told by like alleged directors, right? They would just laugh in my face when they would ask me, "Oh, how do you do this basic function of IT, or how do you like promote a DC controller or whatever it might be, right?" And I'm just starting out. And my response would be, "I'll work with my team to figure out how to do it, and if no one else knows how to do it, I'm going to Google it,
Yeah,
like, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to go pick up a Microsoft book and I'm going to figure it out." And they
yeah,
would laugh at me saying that, you should know this off the top of your head and this and that. I'm like, well, how would I know it off the top of my head if I literally never did it before? Like, I've never had that opportunity. And that's it's such a poor mentality, right? Like,
mhm.
because that would never fly. Like you said, that would never fly in the military, right?
Oh
Like
no,
the teams really
no.
self police each other. Where it's like, when you're not living up to the standard, there's someone there that's going to be like, "Hey, you're not living up to the standard, and you're putting our lives at risk. And so
Yep.
we're going to figure this out real quick,
Mhm.
and like you're going to make the adjustment because I don't feel like dying today because you didn't do the work."
Yeah, you brought up a good point. One thing is like, hey, you get two tries, right? You're like, hey, one, you're not getting at team level. Somebody else from the team is going to coach you up. Good to go. Second one, we're going to send you back to the schoolhouse and see how you do. And you come back refreshed, good to go. Let's keep going, right? The third thing is like, hey, this just might not be for you, right? Because we're going to ask you to eat a lot of crap, do some things you never thought you'd do, and just it just might not be for you. You might not be it. So it's okay. Just go do that, right? The other thing is, one of the things I realized, like I work for a lot of big banks, world banks in cybersecurity, and one of the biggest burger flippers in the world, and the sheer arrogance of directors were like, "You have to be this." I'm like, guys, like, no offense, but you were just googling this how to do that. Like, come on. And so, like, being coming from a law enforcement background and also an attorney, I'm just like, it's a no nonsense, no bullshit conversation. Like, guys, let's just be honest with each other. And the weird part is, a guy in my same position, when I was doing IR for a big organization, he's like, you can't talk to those guys like that. I was like, the hell I can't, man. Like just like today's a special day. Either you're a prick or you're just a prick all the time. So which one is it? So and they would be like, you can say that. I'm like, dude, be a man. Be a self-reliant person. Like stand up for
Right.
yourself, dude. And that's why I think IT, like, this is where this amalgamation of toxic leadership and like super smart guy undermines it, and it's just like, and I see, and I have friends of mine who are female, and they're just like, I don't even want to be in cyber because they get treated poorly, and I'm like, man, that
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there, right? And my wife is a teacher, right? And so I'm a very strong mentality, right? I have a
Mhm.
very strong personality, I guess. And if I feel like someone is intentionally trying to get one over on me, right, or trying to bully me into a situation, once I identify it, like, it ends right there, right? Like,
Yeah,
you can try all you want, but once I figure out your scheme against me, like,
it's
it
over.
ends right there. We're handling this. I'm going to call you out on a phone call. I'm going to call you out on an email to your director and to their VP,
Mhm.
right? I've done all those things before, and it typically ends pretty well. Typically, and my wife, she'll come home and she'll talk about something, that she's dealing with coworkers at school and stuff like that. And I'm just like, you know, I'm I approach it obviously from my mentality. I'm like, you got to stick up for yourself. You need to get in their face. And she's a small, 5'2" Asian lady. Like, I'm like, you need to get in their face. Tell them, all this different stuff. And she's like, you understand? I work at a school. I'm like, man, I would still do it. And
Yeah,
like, but that's like a difference in mentality, right?
yeah,
Where in the teams, that sort of thing is acceptable. That's like the lowest level, right? In IT, that's a little bit more aggressive, but at the same time, I've had teams of primarily women before, where they would go into these meetings because I can't be in 10 places at once, right? And so I would send them into the meeting and I would tell them they're going to ask these questions. They want to talk about this stuff. Here's your answers. We'll work through them, and we'll develop the answer and whatnot, right? Prepare them really well for going into it. They'll go into it and they'll say, exactly what I told them to say,
Yeah.
right? And everyone, on this opposing team will will just completely dispute everything
Yeah.
that they
Yep.
said, even though it's 100% correct. And I mean, I had to do this a couple times where I would have to sit down with the person and tell them, like, I would give them then the exact same answer, that they were given during that meeting. And when they accepted it, I'd be like, well, what's the difference when my team says it?
Yeah.
Right? Don't you
Exactly.
think that they're a reflection of me? Like, they're saying it because I told them to say it, and it's the correct thing to do. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
telling you to do something that's incorrect, or going to put the company at risk or anything like that. And the that whole mentality kind of shifts a bit when it's like, oh, I kind of discounted this person because of how they looked or how they acted or their age or gender, whatever it might be, right?
Or their
um
technical acumen. That's another one.
yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'm right there with you, man. Been in plenty of meetings where I've been sidelined, and it's just like you're just stupid, right? And it's I have a person that I work with daily, extremely smart man, and there are days I'm like, dude, the reason you're not successful the way you want to be is because your personal acumen. Like you need to know how to just talk to people. And
Yeah.
I think if in IT, more specifically in cyber, if you can tell a story and you're nice, and you're good, you're decent, not the best, not the worst, you're decent. I think you're gonna kill it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that you learn when you're going up the ladder, so to speak, in security is being able to tell that story so that all levels can understand what's going on,
Right.
right? Like that took me. I mean, that took me a couple years, honestly, to learn it, and I'm still mastering it, right? But you need that executive buy-in. You need the technical expertise buy-in. You need the middle managers buy-in, right? Like you need all these people buy-in, and they all view this information differently. They all want to receive it differently in different formats and whatnot, right? So how do you tell the story in a way that explains, why we should encrypt this data to an executive, whereas I don't have to explain why we need to encrypt it to a technical person. I need to explain how to do it, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that's the part that I need to explain, and I think identifying that early on is pretty key. But I do kind of want to circle back, right, to in your story, and similar with mine, right? Once you identified the area you wanted to go in, you really stopped at nothing to go and do, you know, side work that you had skills in and whatnot. And, similar to myself, right? When I identified I wanted to get into security, I started doing everything I could on the side
Mhm.
to actually make that happen. Right. And it didn't happen overnight. And I think that's what a lot of people get discouraged from. Right. And in the teams, right, a lot of that training takes years. Like I hear Sean Ryan talk about how it took him 2 years to get through training,
Mhm.
right? And then he finally gets to the teams and he thinks he's just going to go and
Yeah.
operate and things like that, and then he's sitting on a bench for 6
6
months,
months.
8 months, while he's then learning everything else. And he's like, man, I just trained for 3 years basically
Yeah.
to do this job, and I can't even do it.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting mind shift. Not everyone understands that.
Your ego is your worst and best enemy, right? Even myself, you go through the pipeline 2 years. That's all the queues and this, that, and the other, your MOSs, your specialty training, and whatnot. And when you get to your unit, they're like, "That's cool. This is how we do it over here," and you're like, "Oh, okay." And you're like, and then how you clear a house is very different dynamic of clearing a house in the schoolhouse versus here, right? And then you do joint operations with some of the SEALs, Marine Raiders, other guys and whatnot, and you're like, wait, you guys have a whole different process. And then you do a workup, like 2, 3, 4, 5 months workup. Then you're like, oh, okay, now we get along. Then the alpha egos you have to get away with from, right? Like if you can get along without beating the shit out of each other, you'll be all right. So like there's some big boys. Like I'm a pretty big guy myself, but like big boys, big egos, like it's pretty rough. But the question is, will you stop at nothing to achieve? And that's I believe we can do. One of the things I learned a long time ago was you can do everything with nothing. You can.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you absolutely can. I mean, I personally, I feel like we always have whatever we need within us, already, right? Like, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, right? So I obviously I relate that to my religion and whatnot, but I feel like whatever you're trying to accomplish, whatever your path you're trying to go down, you already have whatever it takes already inside of you. It's just up to you to identify it, utilize it, and use it to, your best abilities and whatnot. Right. And I think, you know, I, right. I'll give you some background, right? Because this is why I kind of bring up the military a bunch, right? Because in high school, I went to a very poor high school, so we had military recruiters at our high school, just constantly, right? Every single week, like we had someone out there. I was a wrestler, right? So like they would try and poach me every single day of the week, right?
Oh yeah.
I didn't go into the military out of high school. I was tempted to. I know a lot of friends that I wrestled with. They went into the military, ended up in, different units and whatnot, right? But I always thought, okay, I'll go to college and then I'll go to the military. The reason being is that I didn't want to make military service out to be, for a college education, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to get that college education and then I wanted to go and do the military stuff. And in between, my sister needed a kidney, so I donated my kidney to her,
Oh wow.
and that unknowingly at the time disqualified me from every branch of the military for every job that you could possibly have in the military, right? So
Yep.
it was like, oh, okay, so I get to save my sister's life, but you can't take me, even though I need the same amount of water as everyone else, and I'll do everything else. Like, okay, whatever, right?
Yep.
So in all of this process, I went down and I just researched. I mean, even to this day, I researched nonstop, right? The mentality, the training, and everything else like that. And so, for myself, I try to take that mentality, just grab just a piece, right, and bring it into my life so that I can be more successful and really grow myself. So I wanted to give you that background, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm bringing up a decent amount, and not everyone listening, right, knows that about me, right? So it makes more sense. I don't want people out there to be like, "Oh, this cybersecurity guy is talking about the military," as
No.
if
No.
like
No.
he's a wannabe or whatever. It's
No.
like
No.
no,
That I get a lot of heat, especially from the guys that I was on teams with. Like I did 9 rotations overseas, right? And everyone's like, "Why do you sit with these smart guys?" And I'm like, "Jesus, guys, seriously, do you hear yourself?" I'm like, "Gentlemen, like we were the best at what we did. Like there's only a time and place for conflict and violence, right?
yeah,
What does the next phase of life look like?" And so I'm an imposter here, just hanging out, bull BSing on the cyber side. I honestly feel that way, but I'm at the top now. But I'm like, so much like you, people hear me like, well, what do you know, Rico? You didn't come from IT. I'm like, you're right, man. Like, but I'm here.
right, yeah. I feel like the depth that you have to go into with the teams and with security is like the same level, right? In the teams, I mean, you have to know so many different things, just from a surface level, right? Civilian looking in on it. When you said everyone knows everyone else's job, it's like, okay, well, there's legitimate different jobs. Like there's a comms guy out there.
Yep.
There's a med guy out there. There's snipers and
Yeah.
all this different stuff, right? Everyone has to have that same skill set. The reason being is that if someone goes down, you can't just be like, oh well, our medic is down, no
No.
one's providing medical now, right? Like that isn't a realistic situation. And in cybersecurity, whereas lives are not at stake, of course, and whatnot, but in my opinion, to be a successful security practitioner, you have to be so deep and so intimate with these systems that you know it better than the people that designed it. And that's a very realistic thing. It takes a long time to achieve it. It's very difficult to achieve it, obviously, but you still have to have that understanding, that know-how, right? Like I, I, I I have a good friend of mine who's been in security for a lot longer than me, and he said security professionals typically earn their paycheck 2 to 3 times a year, and if it's any more than that, your company is probably going under,
Yep.
right?
Probably.
And
Yeah.
and he literally explained it like this: the security people are typically the most skilled people in the IT organization, because you could take a security guy and put him on a systems team or a networking team or a cloud infrastructure team, and it may be a little bit difficult. It may be a little bit slower, for the result, right, for a couple of weeks, but eventually they're going to pick it up pretty quick, and they're going to get into that flow, and they'll understand what's going on and whatnot. And the same thing when you're actually applying security principles, you have to know all those underlying, services and processes and, everything else about that system before you start deploying, an EDR agent to it, right? And blow it up and blow up your alerts and
Yep.
everything else.
Yeah, it makes sense, man. You brought up something very, very keen is that cybersecurity professionals are very adaptable, and I think that's very needed. The other thing is it takes a little bit of time. I'm noticing cybersecurity, especially senior cybersecurities, the CISOs, like I'm a CISO myself, we're finding ourselves in more of a product security mindset. Like,
Hmm.
hey, here's our product, here's how we secure it. Because that's the next evolution of a CISO. I think right now the CISO market is oversaturated and everybody wants to drive a ship. Everybody wants to have those cool initials behind the name. It's just not worth it, right? If you ask me. But there is basis of merit to it, right? To get there. You brought up something very interesting on the teams is that, when your medic goes down, there's no medical attention. The interesting part is I've been shot, right? If you ever get shot, the first thing that's gonna happen is not the medic's gonna come. Your buddy should be come pull from your medical kit and be like, you need to bandage yourself up. I got to lay down suppressive fire and get in the fight. And it's funny because everyone's like, "Well, where's the medic?" I'm like, "Dude, we're all busy in the firefight. You got to get yourself, buddy."
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's it's it's interesting, man. It's a fascinating other side of the world for me, at least, right? When
yeah,
start diving into that kind of mentality and whatnot. Um, but
very
like what you said, right? Everyone wants to be a CISO now. And I think that they see these big paychecks and that's what they
what it is.
want. But they don't see the risk. They don't see the sleepless nights, they don't see all all the nuances that there are to the job, right?
Yep.
Where it's interesting, successful CISOs, at least in my opinion, they get their feedback or their status report from like the the very technical people. Like, hey, tell
Mhm.
me exactly where this body is buried. Tell me what it looks like. Like, give me all those details, right, so to speak. And those people are the ones that are staying up in the middle of the night, that have their own lawyers that are going to court for them, on behalf of them for whatever issue that's going on. And I always seem to I always seem to respect those CISOs with that technical capability, right, or that technical mindset a little bit more, because they weren't just a manager, they just weren't an executive or anything like that. They were someone that truly wanted to know, hey, what's going on in this environment? Like, I legitimately need to know because I need to be able to prep the board for, hey, we need $2 million to go and buy this thing. Otherwise, we're going to pay 20, in
Yep.
fees and fines if something ever were to go wrong and whatnot.
Yeah, everybody wants to be a rock star, and so you got to do rock star stuff, right? What
Yeah.
is that? Or everybody wants to be a gangster, so you got to do some gangster stuff. So, being a CISO is not all cracked up to be. I highly recommend that you do something that's. I think everybody should be a CISO, just so you get the expertise that you need and experience, and then realize that you don't want to do it. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. I wonder. I think I would want to be a CISO.
sure.
Um, I'm at the point in my own career where I'm moving past wanting to be, you know, super technical, deep in the weeds, right? I kind of want to move into, more of overseeing and whatnot. So, but we'll see how that goes, right? I know someone that was super technical,
Mhm.
went into management, hated it, went
Yep.
back to being, super technical, and he just stayed there and he loves it. Um,
But I think you have to be in the right mentality, right mind frame, right phase of life to be like, hey, this evolution of life is different, right?
hmm,
Because I'm, dude, people who work for me are extremely brilliant, reverse malware, ransom negotiators, and nice people, but they're like, I don't know how you do what you do, Rico. Like, I wouldn't want to do it. I'm like, I love dealing with clients. That's just me. But at the same aspect, I'm like, I've was there, not as technical as you are, but I just realized like I like this stuff better, and I changed my mind.
Hmm.
And a lot of technical people are like, no, I just want to turn this one widget and wrench. I was like, have a little bit more foresight of where that widget's going. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something that I try to touch on quite a bit, right? Is building your career and your skill set off of what's coming rather than what's here today, right? You should have the stuff of what's here today. You should have that skill set. You should be able to, operate it and whatnot to the highest levels. But you should also be looking, to what's coming, right? So for myself, I mean, at least the past couple times, right? It's been tied to a degree, right? So I got my
Yeah.
master's degree, and that kind of catapulted me into security and cloud security. Now I'm working towards my PhD, doing satellite security for communications satellites and implementing zero trust within it to prepare it for post quantum, right? Because I see all those things going on, and my mentality is the next big war is going to start in space long before it ever starts on the ground, right? We kind of
Yeah.
saw that with Ukraine to some extent, where they were hacking their power grid, Russia was hacking their power grid, and literally just shutting it off. Well, luckily for Ukraine, it wasn't really as tied into IoT
Yeah.
as it is in other places of the world, like America, right? And
Yeah.
so they could manually power back up their grid and kind of get around the exploit, just turn off the computers and power it back up manually, right? Well, in my opinion, I think the next evolution would be warfare against satellites. If I was going to go into a country, and we did this with Iraq, right? You immediately just turn off all communications. No one
Yeah.
in that country is making a cell phone call out. They're not making a satellite call out. They're not doing anything. They're not getting internet. You're not getting power. You're not getting water, right? All of that stuff is actually tied into the satellites, and in some ways. So if that were to ever go down, you have pretty major issues, at least in my opinion, right? In my own research.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So the
so
method.
I'm trying to prepare and adjust and grow my skill set towards that area for something that I guess, feasibly, I guess it may never happen, but I think it'll be here in five
Oh,
to 10
it
years,
happens.
right?
It's definitely happening. I went to Ukraine to go see it for my own eyes, and I have a different perspective of the war. And also went to Gaza and Israel to see the reality of the situation. I have a different perspective too.
Hmm.
Um, Being on the news, I can kind of do that. When it comes to satellite warfare, what I think is if you look up and you adopt and understand the methodology of blitzkrieg, what the Germans created, right, dominate the air, sea, and land all at one time, you can definitely dominate the whole battlefield itself. So you're not too far off. I think you're spot on the game, and you'll more than likely see the it maturitize and amasticize and materialize within the next 3 to 5 years. We're already here, you know.
Yeah,
It's just a matter of watching the satellite fall out of the damn sky now. So
right.
and we'll see it. So I think you're spot on, man. I think you are where you're supposed to be, and I think you're honestly you're way ahead of the people, way ahead of the other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm also like tying it towards kind of like a arduous task, right, of getting a PhD. When I started this whole PhD thing, I I I never thought it would be this difficult. I figured, 2.5, 3 years, I'll be done. I think I started a year and a half ago, and now I'm looking at like 3 years. It's a little tight. That's a little kind of close there, right?
Yeah,
Um, but like, there's so much more to it, and but that also speaks to the community, the PhD community, and how they kind of self-govern and you know really gatekeep in a good way, right? They don't want just anyone getting a PhD. They want you to truly be an expert in this area. Like, if we're going to put PhD at the end of your name, you better know this topic inside and out, like the back of your hand,
yeah,
which is it's something that I appreciate for sure, because I wouldn't want it to be like, an overnight, PhD, you pay this amount, and you get it or whatever. that wouldn't be rewarding to me, you know. But I to shift gears a little bit, I was doing a little bit of what I call light research right before the podcast, right? Well, 5-10 minutes before the podcast, where I just pull you up on LinkedIn, right? See what's there. So I saw some forensics capabilities, that you potentially specialized in, and currently specialize in with your company. Can you talk to me about some interesting engagements with forensics? Because I feel like forensics is a part of cybersecurity that people don't really think about that much. And when
Mhm.
I studied it in my master's, it was like really eye opening, because
Yeah.
you're reverse engineering a system that someone else designed
Mhm.
right there on the fly, and you're trying to figure out what ties to what and how it all correlates and whatnot.
Yeah. So forensics, you remember you have two types of forensics. You have dead box forensics, traditional forensics, which I did for law enforcement and also Office of Public Defense, work in civil and criminal cases. Then you have on the fly incident response forensics, right? Which is two different dynamics. And some of the things that we've seen is like, the most recent one was it was a redirect, right? From a the Russian root school, which is a nation state threat actor, right? And they got really good in regards to multi-factor authenticating, uplinking, outloading your multi-factor, unhinging it, and then re-engaging it. And it's like, whoa.
Hmm.
So a lot of the stuff is traditional reverse malware, trying to figure out where the bot came from, how it implanted itself, and also extracting the C2 node along with TTPs and IOCs. So I mean, it's very dynamic. I mean, some of those things we have to understand that the ransom game is a multi-tiered game. It's $1 billion industry, and you have multiple factors in there. The guys who create the ransomware and also the exfiltration tool are two different teams. The
Hmm.
guys who are actually doing the ransom negotiation is a different affiliate. So it depends who you're kind of dealing with. We've seen some wild things. I've worked over 1,500 different ransomwares, and
Wow.
it's just you see old dogs, new tricks, repackaged stuff. I mean, 0 days all the way to happy birthday attacks. I mean, you name it, we see it. But a lot of it has to do with traditional vulnerability management and doing the cyber hygiene 101, right? Do the right thing, right place, right time, and you'll be okay. But a lot of companies, are like, no, we're fine. I'm like, okay. And now cyber insurances love cyber insurance. We do work on behalf of cyber insurance. They're not stupid. They actually have their own IR teams, and they're like, hey, we're gonna go ahead and use this as a discovery tool, and that's okay. You know.
Hmm. Yeah, man, like IR tabletops. I went through an IR tabletop within the last 12 months,
Yeah.
and you know, one of the biggest critiques that I gave the rest of the teams, rest of the company, was that when we knew that an attack was underway and ongoing, no one even thought to reach out to security. Right? Shouldn't have that been the first call?
Yeah.
Like, because in this hypothetical scenario, we went 10 days without someone notifying security. So it's like guys, I understand. Like, we're security, we should know we have the tools in the right place to identify it and whatnot, right? But you're the product owner. You should know when your product is encrypted. When it
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Say when in doubt, security out, right? Like just call somebody, reach out. What I correlate it to is people want to have validation, like I own this, I own that. I'm like, dude, right now during an incident, there's no time for egos, there's no time for
Yeah,
brashness. Do not fire anybody, because that is the worst thing you can do right there. And then especially if you fire a CISO during that, you just set the wrong tone immediately.
yeah,
So yeah, doing tabletops and incident response tabletops is very paramount. A lot of companies don't do that still, and it's very insurmountable and needed.
yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who used to work for an insurance company, and it seemed like he was just doing incident response after incident response. I
Mhm.
mean, he
Yep.
worked 100-hour weeks for
Yep.
2 months straight, and they did fire a couple people like during that time, and the biggest feedback from the CISO was, hey, right now is literally the worst time that you could be firing anyone.
Yeah.
Like, how about we just let our guys do the work,
Yeah.
because we don't have any other options. Like, what are we going to do? We're going to call CrowdStrike, and they're going to charge us 1.5 million to enter our environment.
Yeah,
Like, come on.
that's exactly it. I mean, as a CISO, you kind of have to make those decisions, but I think you're setting the wrong tone. We start firing people. And number two, like you need all hands on deck. You need wrench turners, and firing people is just going to put your back against one, and also make you look like an idiot. You know.
Yeah, yeah. It starts showing like incompetence almost at the leadership level, right? Where it's like you're firing us like in what situation? Like you already laid us off, half of the team or whatever, and
Yep.
then you're going to start firing people. Like, do you know what you're doing?
Yeah, usually executives want to see money, right? And then
Yeah,
money is correlated to emotion, especially from the executive perspective, because they were like, "Oh, we're in pain. I'm going to cause pain. Who's responsible? Fire that person." Boom. And it's like, dude, like one of my CISO gigs, very long time, my first CISO gig ever. It was very interesting because I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. My first one. I'll grind my teeth at night. I remember I'll stay up late at night, and then company got shut down from the FBI, and I was like, whoa, like
jeez.
that was just wild. I was like, okay, I'm out of here, man. Like I don't want anything to do with this. So
Yeah. How does that even? I mean, how bad do you have to be as a company to get shut down by the FBI or any agency, let alone?
well, they were doing some interesting things, and they're they've been dealt with accordingly. But like, can't really say too much about it. But
Yeah,
they attracted the attention of a federal agency, and they I was like, hey, I'm out of here. Like I can't have any part of this.
yeah. Those guys at the federal agencies, I mean, they're like pit bulls on a chain, right? And once they get a little whiff of something, it's like, oh well, let me get a little bit more. Let me see what else is
Yeah,
there, right? And they start peeling back these layers, and there's like no stopping it. They
usually
they have like the security curiosity,
oh yeah.
from their side too. They have that like unquenchable curiosity.
Yeah, usually when working on the digital forensics for the civil and criminal cases was very interesting. Whenever I work an FBI case, when we saw one of their charges, we knew they had 25 additional charges.
Oh yeah,
And it was just waiting. I was like, okay, here we go, right? So
yeah, yeah. They don't. I mean, they have like what, a 97, 98% conviction rate for a reason,
yeah, they don't go after people they can't convict.
right?
Yep.
I mean, that's a part of the criteria too. Like when when a DA is determining if they're gonna prosecute you, they look at your assets, right?
Oh yeah,
Well,
yeah,
how much money does this guy actually have access to where he can put up a valid legal defense, and are we
yeah,
going to lose if they do that, and all that sort of stuff. That was a part of. I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, and that was a part of it that like I never even thought of before. Like, and you always see it with your company and whatnot. Typically, in the benefits, like you could pay for the legal services for like $10, a month or whatever it is. It's like whenever I
garbage.
see that, I'm like, it's a no brainer. Why do I care about $10?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Usually, whenever you have like legal services, I always tell people, mindful. I used to write legal contracts. And I'm like, there's always a clause to get a provisionary clause to get out of that. So be mindful of what you sign up for because it might not be what you want.
Yeah, yeah. I always read everything before I sign it. Probably too much. Fairly recently, there was an employment contract that came my way, and the numbers made sense, but then you start reading the fine print, and it's like, wait, you want me to you want me to do what? You want to take ownership of my social media accounts? You
Oh yeah, yeah,
you want to control what I can say and when I can say it and everything? Like, this is a security engineer role. What are you
yeah.
trying to do here? Like, I'm not the CEO of a company.
I was working an insider threat job once, right? A project for a very world big real estate firm, and they're huge, huge. And they were like, "You need to go talk to this person about what they post on social media." And my caveat, my exit was, "Guys, we're not the world police. Like they didn't name drop us. Who cares? We don't like
Right.
that. I'm like, we don't like that. It's not good for cause." And I realized then, like, this is just me and my internal dialogue. Like, I love Insider Threat. Like, that's a really good program. If you can ever do it, do it. But the problem is that there's a fine line of like, at what point are we kind of overreaching here? And
Hmm.
shoot, do we care? This is one. This is when I was working for a bank. They were like, hey, go investigate this person. I'm like, all right, cool. So I pull up our social media, blah blah, and like she's making baked goods on the weekends. We can't have that. I'm like, you do realize she's like a Power BI analyst, right? Like, what does it matter? And they're like, she didn't disclose it. I'm like, and there's this guy in code ethics and compliance, and I go, hey man, let me ask you, is it your interpretation of the code of ethics and compliance or is it the interpretation of it? And he's like, well, this is the way I read it. I'm like, dude, you have nothing else to do. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And then
Right.
I got relieved of my duties, and I'm like, I'm out of here, dude. Like, I got into another job project, but it blew my mind. I was like, guys, this is not at all what we should be doing or spending our time on.
Right. Yeah, and it's you have to be able to, really like stand by your own principles, your own, morals, so to speak, right? Because there's so many opportunities in so many different ways where they want, you to be the so-called executioner, right? And go like track it down and, build the case and everything for something as minuscule as, oh, they bake goods on the weekend and they potentially sell it for, $10. Oh wow,
Lord forbid, if a person trying to get out of debt or better yet, put their kid through college,
right.
you go work for a bank, and they're like, hold on, you work at the YMCA in the weekends, we can't have that. I'm like, who is an employer to dictate to you of your wealth? So
Right.
it's just me though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's some employers have that mentality, and it's very weird to me, right? Like, because like my mentality is, it's not happening between, 8 and 5 or 9 and 5. What does it matter, right? Like,
Oh,
I'm signing this contract right here. My time is allocated for you for that time frame. If needed, I work extra, as needed, obviously, given the situation and whatnot. But if i'm if I'm if I'm canceling calls for your company to go and do stuff on the side, that's different, right?
it's different, yeah.
That's a different scenario. But if that's not happening, then what power do you actually have in this arena? Because that wouldn't hold up in court. You're not
No,
purchasing this person's life contract and saying,
exactly.
until you resign, we get 100% of your time. It's like, no.
No, no, yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. It's always frustrating whenever I see that, because it's just like, come on, like, come out of the dark ages.
Nope, it's the old school CEOs like, man, you got to do this. You know what
Right,
I'm saying?
right. Well, Rico, we didn't talk a whole lot about your company. You know, just talked almost 50 minutes.
It's okay.
Didn't talk about your company a whole lot. But I am very cognizant of
Mhm.
everyone's time, right? So when I say an hour, I do truly mean an hour.
Sure.
But before we end, why don't you tell my audience where they could find you if they wanted
Sure.
to connect, and learn more about you, or where they can find your company, and if they wanted to reach out and learn more about that.
Sure. So on a personal level, if anybody wants to reach out, you can look me up on YouTube. I'm on there, and then also on Instagram, Rico underscore Danielson underscore. Right. From a professional perspective, if you want to look up, so one of the companies that I own is called First Responder. It's an incident response and digital forensic firm and ransom negotiation. Firstresponder.us, and we're there. I mean, definitely reach out, reach out to me anytime. I'll definitely advise you on some stuff. But yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, I own a couple of different other companies as well. So, but not cybersecurity related. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the best ways to get a hold of me. Some of the things that we can be very noticeable of is just, be very intentional of your time with me. I usually take meetings or, meet with people that are very intentional. Like, tell me what you want, I'll get you what you need. Right.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It's more
Yeah,
efficient use of your time and theirs.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Rico, for coming on. I really do appreciate it. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, rock and roll, man. I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Cool.
Yeah, man. Well, cool. Yeah, let me know whenever it airs. I really appreciate you. Thank you for having me on. And if I